Hello there, JP here again on Too Much to Think, and my second upload. I'm just like to unpack a few things that I touched on in my introduction for the previous video. Um, Basically, identity was one of the terms I mentioned. It's very apt in today that we need to look at identity and especially since there's certain people that are jumping up and down and having a tantrum continually about racism, and especially if you're white, and there's this continual hyper focus on racism. So let's look at identity since they've jumped up and down so much about this issue. And we have been also maligned and slandered in this respect. But let's look at identity and what it really is. You can look at our identity, who you are, is your race, your ethnicity, your culture, and that's essentially who you are. And there are different tribes on this planet. Scientifically, it's a fact. The left love to ramble on about how, well, when everybody's, red inside and everybody's got blood and everybody's the same. But actually, they can tell racial identity from a skeleton. If that's not enough, they can tell by a DNA sample and, your actual makeup, who you are, what tribes you came from, like down to percentiles. So there is such a thing as race, which we're not allowed to lay a claim to, of course. And when I say we, you know what I mean. So, a little term that came up recently was on the pushback against this vicious, unwarranted attack on ethnic Europeans and Caucasian people was the term, it's okay to be white. Somebody dared to put this up there and put that out there. And that's now, labels you by some people as a racial supremacist, brings up the trigger terms that they use and essentially ridicules you, terrorizes anybody from daring to start even thinking about this. So we need to get a grip on how far into crazy town we actually are. Where the Overton windows, the lines of acceptability have been pushed so far back that essentially we're not allowed to exist. Every other tribe on this planet is celebrated in the press, in Hollywood, their ethnicity and their vibrant culture, is celebrated, but not whites, which they've now used as a term to group us all together. We know what that means. It's Caucasians, it's ethnic Europeans. And if you're ever in doubt as to where you fall in the racial spectrum, you can easily find that out by going to South Africa and seeing if you qualify for any triple BBEE. They've qualified us quite nicely, actually. The left have actually qualified us very nicely. And more and more, this is pointing towards putting us into a group. And the Bible spoke of groups, funny enough. And the one group that comes to mind is the Israelites, the true Israelites. The Bible mentioned a lot about persecution and how this group will be constantly persecuted and had to struggle and fight and run away from in various armies and various battles that surrounded this group. Well, I'm more and more starting to lean towards this idea that they've called it white, and this thing is very sophisticated now. They've got their controlled opposition, they've got them mingling in there, and you know, trying to muddy the waters. But actually, I think by jumping up and down so much about racism, they've actually done themselves a disservice because it's not going to take long before the Christians figure out, then the vast majority of the Christians, not the, including the fake weak Christians, will have to come to the conclusions about this because they've grouped us together in this group, which is pointing towards being the Israelites. I can back it up even by scripture. I've heard it being backed up very well. Perhaps I won't do as much justice. The Israelites were, in the Bible, it spoke that my people will hear my voice. That was in the New Testament. So New Testament and Old Testament links it up. And if you look at the tribes, when Paul went and evangelized the Christian nations, they all became the European nations who to this day carry the cross on their flags. Or just even if they don't have it on their flags officially, they actually are just a Christian country. At least 100 years ago, they certainly were. Anyway, so this to me is actually an advantage because it's clarifying who we are. Then also, I would like to look at racism and the way that they've structured it and what our response should be. And my first response is often a criticism of our own response is why the right have this absolute necessity to expound how they're not racist. Immediately, like defending the newly invented crime of the century. Why? What's freedom of association? Is that not no, that's not your right. You don't dare, how dare you? How dare you? Freedom of association. Well, you could throw that term back at them. Don't kowtow to this hyper sensationalist wording of theirs, whether they've got power behind it or not. I'm not even going to go into that because they have got power behind it and they can do damage to your life, but they're going to do it anyway. So what you've got to do is double down and not be afraid, well, not show it, not act on your fears, but of course push back and put the ball back in their court. Well, what about 60 million Russians murdered, ethnic Christian Russians specifically? 49,000 churches burned down of the ethnic Christian Russians. Most of the Bolsheviks were not Russians. There's a very specific tribe that is Bolshevik. They were all Bolsheviks that were 80% of the first party was of this very specific tribe. But we're not allowed to mention these things because it gets you locked in jail, and they are locking people in jail. And Andrew Carrington Hitchcock has put it quite well in saying, to learn who rules over you, find out who you're not allowed to criticize. And there's quite a few that actually fit that list, to be honest. LGBTQ, XGUR, YZW, whatever. And anti-Semitism laws, Jews, you're not allowed to criticize. Basically every other culture except a straight Christian white male. That's basically the one that's missing from the entire list. And it's pretty obvious what's been done. It's just simply schoolyard tactics on a global scale, getting the entirety of the world and peeking their covetous eyes onto us. Us. I'm using that term again. It's us. It's we. It's whites. It's Israelites. Whatever you want to say. Okay. So and they have put these people, sick them onto us like dogs, and they were not necessarily our enemies. But there's been a certain group that has jumped up and down and made absolutely sure through unlimited funding, film, television, press, media, school education, clubs, and societies, which is also something which needs to be discussed as well, because a lot of these places are places where, it's shame on us because we just don't push back. Nobody even, and I don't mean like in an unpleasant way. I mean just putting it out there. Like, they've had the chutzpah to do these things. Where is your chutzpah? Where is that? How is that these small group of people manage to achieve this? Yes, that warrants also another. I could write a book and give it to you, or somebody else more intelligent than I am. Anyway, back to this racism thing, how they've structured it. In that, this new invented crime, you can have yourself on the lower end of the scale of punishment, your YouTube video deleted, your social media shut down. I've lost 2 Twitter accounts. However, there's also cases of the cops literally coming and knocking on your door saying, "Are we here to check your thinking?" Or some sort of strange George Orwell type speak, and then you go and you've got to be very careful what you say. And the cops are now, firstly, the alarm that you feel because now the cops are knocking on your door. You're living in a place where there's stabbings, bicycles get stolen every day from innocent hipster girls. They it's vile things are going on in the criminal sphere. They don't have resources. You ask the cops, please, like, what's going on? There's so much of this theft going on. They don't have money and they don't have resources. However, you get a knock on your door for this invented crime. It's not in the Ten Commandments. In fact, you are to be proud of your tribe. If your tribe is of the Israelites, well, that's our good luck. I'm speaking. I've already accepted this analogy, as you can see. Many people will jump up and down and tell me that the Earth is flat, and the real Israelites are in Israel, whereas that's kind of like flat earther theology to me at this point, and it's taken many years to get there. Don't get me wrong. I've been a Zionist to supporting this, and I the complexities of the Israel situation, to being a Christo-Judean believer, but I have to accept when you read the scriptures, I can't be a Christian and accept these things because, the words Jesus used against the Pharisees of the day, where you are the synagogue of Satan, they were strongly worded. You are of your father, the devil. Things like that, which it just didn't line up for me a lot of the time. But it's not how I feel. This is the words of God. This is in the scripture. And this is why, they're so in control of Christianity through the World Council of Churches, however they control this whole lot. They have compromised with Christendom is almost dead in a sense, whereas there's literally a sprinkling of people out there that are Christians that'll probably die for their faith. Not that I would like to ever see it go that way. Anyway, another one is banning of books. The hypocrisy of that is phenomenal because in all those movies, those Orwellian type movies where they basically set up a scenario where we're supposed to identify the bad guys as the Nazis, and of course, one of the things they're doing is burning books. Well, yes, the books that they burned were pornography, pedophilia, and all the smut, which they're claiming as free speech. Certain things I believe should not be spoken and should not be free speech. You know, like drag free speech, and then next thing you know, you got drag queen story hour. It's free speech. Yeah, he must be allowed to chat to toddlers. How dare you? Quite honestly, if it were up to me and I had any power in this world, that wouldn't be allowed to be within any visual range of a nursery, let alone come and sit inside there and start reading books. I mean, drag queen story hour is just, well, what they're doing is they're trolling us, essentially. Um, it's an unholy alliance of Bolshevik types and, you know, the Freemasonry sort of group, which have a lot of power as well, but they totally bow down to this Bolshevik power. And then, of course, the liberals that have gone to university and actually our elite in a very real sense. It's quite a chunk out of our society that's very hard to kind of let go of because in this coming struggle that is already formulating, they're against us, our best and brightest. They've been indoctrinated. It seems like there's no expense that they'll spare for multiculturalism. And right down to they would rather be stabbed than be called racist. Literally. I mean that is how, especially the females. Unfortunately, I have to say that they have Stockholm syndrome of the highest order, um, and many other problems as well from this indoctrination. It's been hyper weaponized. I don't know how much blame I can actually put on them because it is hyper weaponized. It comes from a very high intelligence and high level of control. And when I say control, through propaganda, through programming, through schooling, this is the software of our entire society. This is our minds. This is the Bible would call it your spirit, your thoughts, which control the hardware, obviously. And the software is vile, corrupted, broken, and it's obviously manipulative. But every mind must have, every computer must have software, every system must have software. So we also have to have propaganda. Unfortunately, and truth must be within that propaganda. Propaganda cannot be lies, obviously. However, the left have managed to create propaganda with mainly lies. It's quite astonishing how they've done it. But going forward, I mean, I'm leaning towards the black pilled, and I have to also explain the term blue pilled, red pilled, and black pilled. Blue pilled is where you're just a complete leftist and you swallow the whole facade. Red pill is you clear your mind and you don't swallow the facade. You see all the truth and you start to acknowledge it and start to see it. Black pill is when you totally have digested all of this truth and you see very little way out, very little sort of response. They've kind of removed the political avenues. Essentially, when I say that, it could also warrant a bit of an explanation. In a short explanation would be there was a great sort of positive movement in the electing of Trump, and also then he was elected, and it was a little disappointment. And then he did some good, and then big disappointment, and then slowly but surely we've been noticing he's he hasn't done anything. And then Brexit, and also the same thing. But the ball is still in their court. He could still change things. Same with Brexit, but they're not. What we see is continually leaning towards pointing out that politics is like a dumb terminal in programming terms. You don't have any interactivity, true interactivity. You can only go through the check the boxes type of um, process. And, politics, the politicians are essentially, in a human term, a puppet. And they're towed the line easily by wealth, unlimited funds, as I keep mentioning. An example of this that I've heard as a rumor is that F.W. de Klerk has got the fourth biggest account in Zurich, or the bank account. That's astonishing. So they can throw a lot of money at these problems if you're that person in power. Um, so what I'm doing is identifying issues, but who out there has you know res- responses and strategies? A lot of people have some strategies. I feel that in a lot of places where we could easily push back, there's nothing happening. I mean, really, it's just there's nothing happening, and nobody could prevent that pushback ever. But people don't do anything about it. And I've experienced this in living out there in the actual realm of existence in your college, your clubs, and your societies. I can understand the control over the companies, but these things are places where sphere of influence could easily be achieved, and they're not. So they all you've got there is capitulation. You know, um, so they talk. The left love to talk about safe spaces. You know, but actually, what they've done is they've removed all of our safe spaces. And I say ours. You know what I mean again, right? Anyway, um, so I've obviously come through this whole learning process by listening to other people who have in turn done thousands of hours of research so that lucky people like me don't have to. I can just pop out the key facts, which they would have had to go through mountains and mountains of information. There's obviously, and a lot of people that could recommend and do recommend. Um, I could say, that I don't think I'll do that quite now, except for Devon Stack in Blackpool. He's very good at in pointing out how propaganda has worked in film. It's quite intelligent how he's done it. But also, what one has to acknowledge is the incredible creativity of the left and these people. It's like being like a gypsy show. They come and mesmerize everybody with the juggling act and flamethrowers and bearded ladies and you know three-legged men and flea circuses and what etc. The whole thing has been done quite masterfully, but the messages that they've dropped in there have been pure toxin. So Devon Stack is quite good at pointing out and showing you exactly what's going on. So I'm running out of things to point out here and say. Um, but keep a lookout for my posts and videos if as long as I'm still around, and I'll keep posting them as long as they let me. Have a lacquer time and good night or good morning or good afternoon whenever you watch this.